This presentation is offered to the greater glory of God and appreciation for the legacy of 6 generations of exemplary Weston heritage, and also as a tribute to the memory of Barbara O'Malley, an extraordinary lady who made a difference. The story of Weston is an epic saga of history and heritage. Fortunately, many historians have conscientiously gleaned and chronicled all the important events. Our heritage is the product of extraordinary people and their encounters with triumphs over many tragedies. Our people implored God to grant them the wisdom to accept the things that they could not change, the courage to change the things they could, and the guidance to know the difference. We're going to pursue the elements responsible for Weston's rapid growth, her gradual demise, and glorious rebirth. We will study the community and the people, the location, their homes, churches, shops, and businesses. William Paxton introduced his 1897 Annals of Platte County with a single stanza. Our county records claim no heroes known to fame, no mystic legends old. No monuments are found, no ruins mar the ground, no minstrel tale is told. President Thomas Jefferson was a true visionary with regard for history, a keen sense of values and direction. He was responsible for the Louisiana Purchase, the Lewis and Clark expedition, without which there would have been no Weston. In 1817, Jefferson wrote his longtime friend and neighbor, John Adams, observing that a morsel of genuine history is a thing so rare as to be always valuable. The people of Weston respected his judgment. Weston is a testimonial to his observation. Weston's history and heritage are cyclical, toggling between triumphs and tragedies. The oldest town in the Platte Purchase was an instant boomtown success. The proximity to Fort Leavenworth, rich loess soil, ideal port, and enterprising settlers made it the gateway to the West. It was the town furthest west in the United States trade. The population forged from 0 to 5,000. Weston was second only to St. Louis in activity and importance. Then, beginning with the war, the citizenry plummeted to less than 1,000. The Civil War, fires, floods, destruction of the port, loss to the railroad, typhoid, and Asiatic cholera took their toll. In Weston's National Register nomination papers, it was pointed out that from the aspect of historic preservation, it was indeed fortunate that the town had not been able to maintain its antebellum vitality. The true blessing was that the 1,000 who stayed cherished and nurtured the rich cultural heritage of their forefathers. We will examine the elements of that heritage to see what makes Weston so uniquely special. History is a recording of events. Heritage is a study of people's reactions and the effect of those events. Heritage is nebulous. It's attitude. You can't touch it. No one can ever take it from you. The same events may cause diametrically opposed reactions to any two people. Our pioneers suffered hardship and endured deprivations so that their lives could make a difference. That difference is our legacy. Their lives attest to Thomas Edison's contention that restless is discontent, and discontent is the first necessity of progress. There are 3 categories of history: what was written, what was said, and what was physically preserved. Archaeology, what was passed on, is the most objective. Our Weston legacy has been maintained as it was in history from 2,500 years ago. Weston offers 3 museums: Weston Historical Museum, Lewis and Clark Exhibit, and the Bunnell Farm Museum. Many history authors have referred to Weston as Queen of the Platte Purchase, Mid-America's most historic city, a town saved by destruction, the town that time forgot, the town that refused to die, town where our past is present. In The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck asked, if we don't know our heritage, how can we know who we are? The dictionary defines heritage as an inheritance, something that is passed down from preceding generations. Heritage includes the treasure trove of values and the traditions which were cherished by our ancestors and appreciated enough today to be saved by our descendants of tomorrow. Our heritage is determined by our ancestors, associates, teachers, and mentors. It is tempered by our environs and the times in which we live. It is not the honor that we take with us, but the heritage that we leave behind that forms the perception of a society and its communities. Under the London Company Charter of 1606, Virginia's territory extended to the Mississippi River. By the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, the United States acquired 828,800 square miles of new territory. Our western boundary moved to include lands that are now Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. The purchase price was $15 million, still a bargain at $219 million in today's money. The new wilderness was set aside as the white man's appeasement of conscience to the Indians, who were pushed even further west when Missouri was added to the Union. Missouri's western boundary extended due north from the intersection of the Kansas and Missouri rivers. The fertile lands west to the Missouri River were the new Indian hunting grounds. The Platte Purchase Treaty was an 1836 land acquisition that added 3,149 square miles east along the Missouri River. The acquired area was nearly as large as the combined states of Delaware and Rhode Island. On March 28, 1837, President Martin Van Buren proclaimed the Platte Purchase part of the state of Missouri. Missouri was already the largest state by land area. William Clark presided over the ceremony at Fort Leavenworth. The Iowa, Sac, and Fox tribes were to receive $7,500 and some other usual promises. The town of Weston was the first established. It was so named as it was the outpost furthest west in the United States trade. The Missouri Compromise had permitted Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state. The settlers from Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee had been engaged in tobacco and cotton, both extremely labor-intensive crops. Slaves were the workhorses of those crops. It was hemp that replaced cotton in the Platte country. During the country's westward expansion, Fort Leavenworth was a forward destination for thousands of soldiers, surveyors, immigrants, American Indians, preachers, and settlers. The fort is the oldest active U.S. post west of Washington, D.C. It has been in operation for over 180 years. The proximity of the fort to Weston provided business for the local merchants and tradesmen. Location A at the top right is Weston. B marks the site of the steam ferry at Rialto. Those wishing to cross the river availed themselves to the ferry boat to convey them and their goods to the fort at C, at the lower end of Weston Bend. In 1856, John J. McNamara, an Episcopal clergyman, wrote a day-by-day account of the life in Weston. He reported,
"The quartermaster threw millions into the coffers of the traders at Weston and the farmers and stock raisers of its neighborhood. The streets and shops of the town 2 or 3 times in the year would be crowded with the various tribes of Indians who would have come to trade after receiving their payments. In addition to all of these means of gain, much of the overland trade into New Mexico, California, Salt Lake, and Oregon took its rise from here. The traders of Weston, in a word, did an immense business. I never saw in a town of 2,800 inhabitants in any state where money in gold and silver was so plenty, and where wealth was so general in the possession of the traders. Beside these circumstances, Weston had a character of men and measures peculiar even to Missouri."
The outreaches of Weston's port were defined by the bluff roads. They were studded with boarding houses and saloons. The military road began at the Riley House at what is now Welt Street. The Lynch House on the North Road is at the end of Washington Street. The port came in toward Water Street, now Market. A mooring ring was in the side of the Weston Chronicle building. That ring is now in the museum's side yard. The dock was a constant, round-the-clock beehive of activity. A lookout in the bell tower of the Presbyterian Church would ring the bell to announce a boat entering the port. That toll summoned draymen, stevedores, and warehousemen. Hemp, tobacco, corn, and apples were shipped all over the United States. The port of Weston, able to hold 5 steamers at a time, was second only to St. Louis in activity and importance. As many as 225 steamboats visited in a year. As compared to the open prairie, steamboat passengers' accommodations were quite comfortable. Passengers could choose a cabin or deck-only ticket. Many lines touted the security of howitzer on the bow to discourage any gentleman of the bush. You made good time. Boats traveled night and day. Downstream, you made 8 miles an hour. Upstream was the same as the average walking pace, 3 miles an hour. Rivers don't flow in a straight line. We calculate Weston to St. Louis on I-29 at 250 miles. By river, it is 506 miles. There were nearly 100 potential stops by steamers. Weston was the 6th stop beyond Parkville. Weston to Kansas City was an overnight trip. The overland journey from Weston to Oregon and California meant a 6-month trip across 2,000 miles of difficult country. It was an expensive undertaking. It was estimated that the journey cost a family about $1,000. In addition, they needed a specially outfitted wagon costing about $400. A canvas top had to be waterproofed with linseed oil and stretched over a framework of hoop slats. The wagons were packed with food, supplies, cooking equipment, and water kegs. The maximum load was 2,500 pounds. A typical family of 4 carried 800 pounds of flour, 200 of lard, 700 pounds of bacon, 200 pounds of beans, 100 of fruit, 75 pounds of coffee, and 25 pounds of salt. Only small children and older parents rode in the wagon. Others walked beside the slow-moving vehicle or rode on the back of a horse. In addition to her advantages of location, steamer, and wagon transportation, Weston's wind-blown soil and moderate climate made her ideally suited for most any crop. As back in their native Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, our pioneers had a ready workforce and could engage in the most profitable, even if labor-intensive harvests. Hemp and tobacco were extremely profitable. 40% of Weston's population was slave labor. Most of them lived in cabins at the northern edge of town. They were extremely valuable and treated as such. Many of our finest citizens are buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery. Many blacks are interred there as well. Hemp is one of the earliest domesticated and fastest-growing biomasses known. It produces up to 25 tons of dry matter per 100 acres. Plants are grown close together and reach a height of 10 to 12 feet. The crop depends on conditions after harvest. Cut plants are clubbed, combed with a hackle, and left to rot in the field. The fibers were pressed into huge bales and transported to the rope walk. Generally, the fibers were twisted in the field. Weston had 3 1/4-mile-long covered walks. The resultant cordage was coiled and transported to the factories in St. Louis. There were 36 drays licensed to transport coils to the waiting steamers in Weston. Each slave worker was expected to comb at least 9 pounds of hemp a day. A steady worker could do 20 pounds. Most of the cordage was intended for rigging on sailing ships. It was subject to rot when wet. The rope had to be tarred before use. Weston became the hemp capital of the world. Weather conditions during the winter determined the quality of the hemp crop. In 1860, Weston had a record harvest of nearly 20 tons. That record stood for over 150 years. The farmer received $200 to $300 per ton, but after 1875, cordage production had ceased. The labor force had moved, and less labor-intensive grain crops replaced hemp and tobacco. The stalk fiber of hemp is used for cordage. The leaves supply the recreational drug. This year, the Platte County Sheriff's Department was notified of a hemp crop in the vicinity of Kansas City International Airport. They reportedly burned close to $5 million worth of marijuana harvest, and the folks downwind seemed unusually contemplative. The manager of the Missouri ASCS office declared Weston soil to be comparable to that of the Nile Valley. It was reportedly very rich. The deep, rich earth is ideally suited to burley tobacco. From the 12 by 100-foot canvas-covered beds in March to the cadence of the auctioneer and the final processing into hogsheads the following January, Weston's brown gold attracted countless visitors to its annual auctions. Weston was the only tobacco auction west of the Mississippi. A quarter-ounce packet of seed would sow a bed and provide enough plants for 2 acres. An average 2-acre crop would yield over $9,000 at the local auction, but every cent had to be earned. The plants had to be set in the field, and they had to be topped to remove the suckers. At harvest, the leaves were gathered and tied into hands. The hands were strung onto stakes and hung on the rafters in the barn until they came into case. The leaves had to dry, yet absorb enough moisture so they could be handled. The cured hands were laid on baskets for inspection and grading. The average weight of a basket of tobacco was 500 to 600 pounds. Congress, with various agricultural programs, initially subsidized, then set regulated allotments on the amount a farmer could grow, and with health concerns, production was cut drastically. Weston's transportation industry was lost to the river-changing channels and the railroad. Her hemp and tobacco advantages suffered because of the loss of her workforce, which was brought on by the Civil War. She did enjoy a real advantage with her apple orchards, a brewery, and distillery. All of these were well regarded in this country as well as in Europe. The Shawhan Applejack Distillery was on Water Street, and the warehouse set behind. Perry's Mill was on the Leavenworth Bluff Road. The brewery and distillery were in the same locations as today. Family life in early Weston was punctuated by some lighter moments. We would think of it as work, but they considered these to be leisure. The primary recreation was conversation. We have all heard of spelling bees. Actually, there was a bee for almost everything that might involve a gathering where friends and neighbors joined together in a single activity. The term bee might come from the Middle English word bene, which means a prayer or a favor. In England, a dialect form of this word, B-E-E-N or B-E-A-N, referred to voluntary help given by neighbors toward the accomplishment of a particular task. The men had ice cutting, slaughtering, and barn raising. Their concept was almost communistic. Everyone did what he could for those with any need. Each was, in his own way, his brother's keeper. That was the basis of Weston heritage. The ladies had spinning bees, quilting, husking, and such. There are references to spinning bees back to the mid-1700s. Bees were an opportunity to visit with others with similar interests. The children had spelling bees. They played Hucklebuckle Beanstalk, Fox and Geese, and Mary Mac. They had competitions involving the solution of a puzzle. The rebus was a popular form of picture puzzle. The vernacular of the times is quite different. We'll give you a couple of clues. The spit held a joint of meat or fowl above the fire. The disc-like bowl in the center is a spittoon, and the military gentleman was General Butts. Therefore,
the gentlemen are requested to spit in the spittoon, and not on the floor, and to throw their butts and stumps in the stove or out at the window.
Stevedores, draymen, and warehousemen, and other laborers conversed in one of the many saloons. Ben Holliday had a popular spot near the wharf. He purchased whiskey by the barrel for 25 cents a gallon, and sold it for 25 cents a shot. Frank Kelly's in the hotel was the gathering place for politicians, professionals, tradesmen, and traveling salesmen. Frank purchased all of the remaining stock of the distillery when David Holliday died. He found a vintage bottle of the brewery's Pilsner in a well, and he kept it in his safe for many years. Watch for it on eBay. Some of Weston's most ardent promoters were members of our Masonic Lodge. As a group, they served as guardians of our heritage. The Weston Lodge was chartered in October of 1842. Their records have faithfully portrayed what had transpired. The lodge suffered considerable damage as a result of fires in 1855, 1859, and 1884. They were among the first in the restoration of their building. Community meetings are conducted on the ground floor, and regular lodge meetings and ceremonies take place on the second floor. The Preserve America Driving Tour and CD provides a map identifying 89 historically significant locations. These are available at the museum, chamber, and city hall. Churches serve as the conscience of the community and greatly influence the bounds of mores and taboos of our heritage. Besides the spirituality of the congregation, they figure greatly in leisure entertainment. Our churches have sponsored Sunday schools, Bible classes, socials, picnics, revivals, and chautauquas. Weston has 6 churches organized before the Civil War. The Methodist Church, diagonal from the chamber, commenced building in 1859. Work was suspended during the Civil War and was completed in 1867. You can see what a feat this was if you will look up the backside to the 3rd floor sanctuary. Pleasant Ridge Church is at the other end of the spectrum. The church, cemetery, and college were the work of Jesse and John Vineyard. Reverend Robert James preached here in February 1844. You might have heard of a couple of his boys, Frank and Jesse James. J.C. Penney was an 1859 graduate of the college. His son, J.C., had a chain of clothing and department stores throughout the country. President Lincoln's first love, Mary Owens Vineyard, is laid to rest in the churchyard cemetery. Your family can enjoy 5 of Weston's